occasional discourse on the Negro question. That was a paper that basically laid out what should happen to the islands in the West Indies within the British Empire after emancipation. And in that particular paper, certain things were laid out. A, the usual idea that white blood is more precious than any other blood in the world, and that white blood paid for these islands. B, that white blood is superior, and the position of the Negro, and that is a term that you know that I use a lot, because I don't go with the African thing, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. But the position of the Negro, in his words, should be that of a servant, to be of service to the mother country per se. When Eric Williams went to London, England, he had two problems. He had to have some type of consensus with the opposition at the time, which was the Democratic Labour Party led by Rodinat Capildeo. And going into the independence, there were all sorts of dissonant voices within the East Indian community. Some of them wanted to separate. And separatism is another interesting idea, and where it has us today. But he went there to negotiate with the British as a Negro. And you have to understand that there were two vectors of black resistance in the West Indies. There was the Negro vector, in which you were basically without knowledge of self. And all of your ideas and customs were based upon what you had been taught. And Eric Williams is educated in Oxford. So he was using their God, their morals, their logic, their literature, their enlightenment, their everything to argue for a place at humanity. Now, given this in light of what I told you about what Thomas Carlyle wrote, you'd see that it's really quite contradictory. Now, I guess they must have been quite amused by the whole thing. And so he accepted as a starting point for our freedom, acceptance of all of the laws of colonialism and slavery that ruled us prior to independence. Now, that is highly problematic, and is part of the reason that we find ourselves in such a dysfunctional and dystopian state today. Okay, because that says several things. It says that everything that the European did to my foreparents was good, right, and correct. It says that the European was superior because he brought a civilizing influence to us. You understand? It says that his systems are superior, and if you find yourself as it is today, where you find yourself incompetent at running the system, well, then that is a result of your inferiority. Okay, and one must admit that we are incompetent, because the appeal court ruled in Section 34, on the repeal of Section 34, based on the affidavit of the Attorney General, and the appeal court basically said, blame, I don't know if you saw the headline, it said blame all. Okay, and it said blame all based on the testimony of that, the unchallenged testimony. So what it basically said is that Parliament was incompetent. That's what the basic ruling, and then the Attorney General went around the next morning looking for every media house he could find to tell them that it was a victory. Now, I find something rather quite funny about that, but I don't know about you. So you have this idea of incompetence, okay? The other vector of resistance, by the way, for people who are curious, was the vector, or the maroon vector, which we didn't have much of in Trinidad. We did have, for a short period, have a very small maroon community, but the maroon got off the ship, he ran away, and resisted from a knowledge of self, although it was still a hybrid culture, because you had people coming from different cultures, so he had to create a new African type of culture. It wasn't a homogeneous type of culture. So there was a mixture of cultures among the maroon community. So, you had that level of a resistance, and as I said, you had the Negro level of resistance. So we started from a point of acceptance of everything that came before. And and they did this, by the way, through the instrument of a savings clause. So I don't know if you remember the other day, we had a headline in the paper says 175 or 76-year-old prison laws. I don't know if you saw that headline. When they had the whole prison gate thing going, it says the prison needs to be reformed. The laws were 176 years old. And if you do the mathematics, you will see that they wrote that law in 1838, right after emancipation, the prison laws. And that is when they started writing laws to deny things like land ownership to black people by changing the game. Because black people, unlike people always say black people do this, black people, we were very industrious. When we got off the plantation, we pooled our resources, we pooled our money in order to buy land. And they changed the nature of the game. Okay, they wrote a lot of laws to change the game to a game of exclusion, because they still needed a cheap workforce. So that is the starting point of our freedom, and that leads us to our incompetence today and our inability to run the system and run it properly, because the system was never built for us and by us.
We're having fun still.
We need man have a chance.
You have pork, you can pass and get a little taste. Oh gosh, she's a boss. You hear the kind of prices. Let's take one more. Let me go and drink a beer and eat some giraffe pork.
The whole selfie craze that's taking place. People taking selfies
I don't mind, personally. I mean, I do it.
Okay, yeah, because I have a selfie disorder. I'm borderline.